right, so let's start. Hello, everyone again. Welcome to this month's Dr. Jaspersoft session. We're so glad to have you here, guys. Thank you for joining. I'm Badr Draifi, a customer success architect here at TIBCO. We, along with Kamal Kumlin, who is here with us, are now the new Dr. Jaspersoft hosts. For those of you who already know Mike Vilkovich and didn't attend the last webinar, so he announced that he's moving on and gave us the rings. So we hope we can fill his shoes. Kamal Kumlin will be presenting an interesting topic today, cross-origin resource sharing with JasperReports Server. So Kamal, if you can present, thank you. So as you see here, we're going to talk about course, and we also brought some backup to answer your questions. There is Kate Meadows, our colleague, customer success architect TIBCO 2, along with Jamie Russell, in case we need any technical help on the Zoom webinar, since this is our first time. So thank you all for being here. Gonna start by talking about the next session. Kamal, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. So our next Dr. Jaspersoft session, we'll be talking about this new feature on JasperReports Server from 7.8, JasperQL. JasperQL is a new query language that will help you create your domains, create your reports from Studio by connecting them to domains instead of just SQL query. And then you can leverage the power of the Jasper report domains into your Studio reports. So there is a lot of new functions that we've added. We can do now aggregation, sorting, and much more. An interesting topic too that will be held on June 10th next month. Be held on next month. So please go and register. The landing page of Dr. Jasper will be ready probably later today or tomorrow. So you're welcome to join our next Dr. Jasper. Okay, so Kamal Kumlin, I guess, yeah, so just before starting, Kamal, sorry, please guys use the Q&A section in Zoom if you want to ask any questions. This is easily monitored for us, so we can keep up with all of your questions. So yeah, don't use the chat. We might miss some of your questions if you do. The Q&A will be the better option. Thank you, guys. Kamal, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Hey, Badr. Thanks very much. Thanks for the introduction. Very nice of you. So let's get started. Basically, we're going to look into just the agenda, a very quick agenda of what we're going to do. So first, a quick overview, of course, for those of you who might not know about it. Then we'll look into some typical use cases. And then we'll dive into the specific configuration for JasperReports Server 7.5.1 and earlier versions, and then with more focus then later on 7.8.0 and later versions, and 7.9 in particular, which I'm going to use for the demo, which is obviously we have a different configuration and much easier there. So we'll see, and then we'll talk about some typical or actually some known issues and typical situations that you might encounter, and also some troubleshooting tricks. And then we'll dive straight into the demo. Okay, so what is course? Is basically it's a security mechanism. So we can so it's implemented in by the client. This is sometimes a source of confusion. So typically it's going to be a browser. So it's you don't find this type of checks in other type of clients normally. And also please do not confuse course with CSRF or CSRF as they call it, which is a more server side, and it's kind of a more it's another level, let's say, after course. But first of all, you're going to need course to work, even to have a type of a request that would work with CSRF. But anyways, so the server only provides information if required by the browser, right? So If a browser doesn't support CORS at all, for example, some older browsers like Internet Explorer 7 and older, nothing's going to happen because the browser just doesn't support it. Obviously, hopefully nobody's using such an old browser. So any kind of more modern recent browsers will have this. But of course, if you have a poorly configured server, then the browser will cause the browser to block access when it's not necessary. So it's going to be a problem. So the mechanism is based on HTTP headers entirely, and basically allows the server to indicate any origins other than itself. And by origin is a combination of basically scheme, domain, and port. So that which a browser should permit loading resources from that external origin. So we'll see that anyway. It's going to be easier to see. And please do review this link from the Mozilla website. It's very detailed. There's a lot of information there. It's very clear. And some of the text here and the diagram that you'll see right now is coming from that website. So here's just a typical situation where domain A is making, the client could be a desktop or mobile phone, doesn't matter. A browser makes a request from domain A, and then in that page, and that becomes the main page, right? And then in that page, there's some other resource that needs to be loaded from a different domain, so domain B. And this is kind of shows you a workflow. So the first part, same origin, requests are always allowed. It's just the standard one, the basic one. And obviously the second part is the cross-origin request, and those are controlled by CORS. So now in terms of use cases, as we said, typical request like we saw before, you have some front-end JavaScript code that is served by domain, and then you make some typically a XML HTTP request, or more recently, you normally use you would use maybe the fetch protocol or fetch method in JavaScript, and then you make a request for some data or some resource from another domain. Obviously, in JasperReports Server, or JRS as we call it, typically this is done via visualize.js. Not necessarily, but typically that's where you're going to use it. So one thing I wanted to mention here is that sometimes you don't have to use CORS, right? And you can bypass it completely. And so if you have a server-side application, for example, in Java or Python or whatever your language is, when possible, make the REST call to JasperReports Server directly, server to server. So in that case, the client, it's not involved in that exchange, and so there's no CORS. And so you bypass CORS, things might be simpler, and also sometimes this gives you additional advantages in terms of performance, or depending on how you manage then that data that you retrieve through the REST API. So just to let you know, you don't have always to do this to make this kind of request. You can go through the server in some situations. And another important aspect is the pre-flight requests. So these are done through the options method in HTTP. And this pre-flight request will be made in most cases, unless it's a very simple request. So we'll see that in the demo. But it's important to know what is a pre-flight request and why it happens. It's basically a check the browser makes before making the actual request. That's what's called pre-flight, to the server. Say, hey, do you have these capabilities? Can I run this get on this resource with this, with these headers? You might have some custom headers, and then the server will reply, basically yes or no, and then based on that, it's going to go ahead and make the request. Now, this type of request is typically cached, so it's not made every single time. So often you'll see that the first time you make the request, there's going to be a pre-flight, but then the second time there's going to be no pre-flight because the browser remembers he's already done it, and this is actually controlled in the server. What's the age of that cache? So in Jasper, typically by default is 5 minutes. So within those 5 minutes, we won't make another pre-flight. We just make the normal requests. Okay, so now let's get into specifically the configuration. So basically, we have a wiki that I created not too long ago, maybe a couple months ago, because there was a bit of confusion. And there you see how you do the configuration 751 and earlier. So basically, the recommendation is to add a course filter to the WebXML file of Jasper and comment out the existing one, the previous one, which is the default. You need to replace it basically with this new one. And in terms of the properties, you can copy them from a vanilla 7. I mean, they are in the article, so you can look at those properties. But if you're in doubt, you can copy them from vanilla 7.9 installation, so our latest version. If you do this, later this year, it might be our next version, right? So just to see, okay, what are the latest recommended? That's a good starting point. Sorry, just a bit of water. And the file where you find this is the application context security per web.xml. So, but the structure will be different. You can't just copy that configuration and paste it into the WebXML. You just take the property values, but you need to use the structure that it's in 751 or 750 or whatever version you're running. Now, the main difference here is that in 751 and earlier, visualize.js still requires its own configuration, which is separate. So there's a thing called domain whitelist that we'll look into. And so unfortunately, you'll have to put the domain whitelist, whatever origins you want to allow. But then you also need to do it in the WebXML for if you need to do those requests from non-visualize.js scripts or applications. Okay, so now in 780 and later, we also have an article that explains in more detail, but the configuration is much easier. So you just set the one or more domain whitelist, depending on how many origins you want to set, and it should just work out of the box, and you don't need to edit any files. You just do that through the web UI. We'll see that, and it will work for both custom embedding and visualize.js. So it's an improvement we made, and the config that allows that is already in Jasper Server, in the web bin file. This is actually will be the application content security per web. So I'll fix that slide, but that's where you find it, as we said before. But typically you don't have to make any changes there unless you have special requirements, and you can just set the domain whitelist. In the best case scenario, you just set that. You don't even need to restart the server, and it just works. So we're gonna have a look at that. Now, in terms of known issues, so we have a bug that we found recently. So if you make a course, if you're using course with a JasperReports Server configured with CAS for authentication, and you use Visualize, or to be honest, anything that uses the JSpring security check endpoint, you're gonna have issues unless you apply this hotfix. And this is available for 7.8 right now. It's been released in April, but we don't have one released yet for 7.9. If you are affected by this, and it's very important, please log a support case and ask to escalate the case so that we produce the hotfix. But the fix is already there, so we already had the fix, so it shouldn't take a long time. And of course, our next release already has the fix. So another thing that we've seen that causes trouble sometimes is, obviously, if you have a very simple network configuration, typically no problems. But if you have a bit more complex architecture, so you have reverse proxies, load balancers, firewalls, all these things can mess with HTTP headers potentially if they're not configured correctly. And the problem is sometimes the people doing this type of work, they're not responsible for the network configuration, so they have to work with those teams. But basically, I'm linking an article here for an Nginx configuration. This is what I'm using in my own local install that I'm going to use for the demo as an HTTPS or TLS endpoint, or how do you call it? Endpoint for Jasper. And I'm using that as a simple proxy, and you can just, we'll share the slides obviously, and you'll have the links, and look at that configuration, and ideally port basically the same configuration to your own setup. So if you could have an F5 firewall or load balancer, so hardware or software. There's obviously many different applications that you can use. So just try to emulate that configuration and do the same in your own setup. And the other thing that we're seeing is that at the moment it's a little bit hard to debug the relevant course classes. So we tried, but there's not a lot of instrumentation. We need to add more code instrumentation so that there's more information when things go wrong, and so that you can see it in the logs, and or debugging the application. So this is kind of a bit of issues that we know so far. And then pretty much final slide. So troubleshooting tricks. So if you're in trouble, if things are not working, you can add the options method to the list of allowed methods. Now, by default, this is not there, and typically it's not. Normally, it's not required. In my environment, it's not there, and things just work fine in 7.9. But we've seen in some situations, it's not clear yet that you need to add that manually, maybe in your Tomcat configuration or Jasper Server Web XML. So just to let you know that this might be necessary. Now for troubleshooting, so you probably all know the tool curl. You can make simple requests even from inside the container or VM when you don't have direct access to the network from your machine. So you can just SSH into that container and then do a quick test. So it's not a full test like a browser, because a browser is going to be more complex. So it doesn't give a final answer, but at least it gives you an indication of, okay, is this completely wrong, or is this something in the network, blah, blah, blah. So it's very useful, and we'll see that briefly. Now, another thing I want to mention, this is true for pretty much any configuration, not just for course, but just make sure you don't bring in old configuration files from, let's say, 7.5.0 or 7.5.1, and then if you upgrade to, let's say, 7.8, you just copy the configuration and copy and paste, and then you're gonna end up with the new file that we talked about that has the standard configuration for 7, let's say 8, and then you're gonna have the other course filter in WebXML, and then they're not gonna work, right? Because you're gonna have two filters, it's gonna be messy. So just make sure that typically you do if you have a lot of custom configuration, do a brand new install and then merge things manually, but you need to know what you're doing. So you can't just merge, like the files automatically. You have to look at the beans. Okay, do I need this, and bring it over or not? So just know that for course, don't bring it from WebXML. Simply look at the configuration that out of the box that's there, and add your domain, your origins in the domain whitelist. That we'll see. The last thing is this website. I found it useful to explain. It just it's like a wizard, and it brings you through step by step. So if you want to visit that, it's gonna probably clarify some doubts you have. So that's good for troubleshooting as well. And that's it. So we're gonna get straight into the demo. So I believe I don't know, Badr, if there's some questions that we might want to take, or we take them at the end. How would you like to proceed?
Yeah, we can go. You can go ahead with the demo, Kamal. There was already a question, and it was answered by Kate Meadows.
Right.
So we still don't have any open questions right now. So
Okay.
just a reminder, guys, you can go ahead in Q&A section and ask all of your questions. We're going to group them after, and we're going to answer them once the demo, once Kamal finishes the demo. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. And that question that Keith answered, if possible, Keith, at the end we'll go through it together so that we can speak it out loud, so everybody can hear it. And I mean, if it's relevant, obviously. So now I'm going to share my whole screen so that you can see also other elements that we're going to need. So so we'll start with an incorrect configuration, right? Which is typically what happens at the beginning. So we make a few requests to see what we get. So in incorrect course config, I consider that if it's empty, so if you didn't set any cross domain origin, or if you put the star. Now the star, I guess it's debatable that it's incorrect, but it's really not recommended for a number of reasons. But so we'll see. We'll see that anyway, and then we'll do the proper configuration, and then we'll try a few things. So this is on, again, this is on 7.9. I'm just going to show you briefly the article I talked about. So this is the 751 and earlier. We have some sample configuration here and some way of testing it. And then this is the one for 7.8 and 0 and later. So just to have a quick look at that. Now, this is my local server, and you can see that I have a domain whitelist and there's nothing. So it's an empty value. So I'm going to try and let's see if I'm timed out. Yep. So I'm going to go back there. So server manage server attributes, and it's empty. And okay, so let's start with course. Sorry, with curl, right? So we said we're going to test that. So I have some scripts here. So Butter, of course, let me know if you cannot see the curl text, but so basically it's just a simple request.
It will be better, Kamal, if you if you zoom in a little.
What about that?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yes.
Yeah, a bit more. Okay, I can do a bit more. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for letting me know. So basically, curl tool that you find pretty much anywhere in any kind of machine, and in this case we can do an options request. So we're simulating the pre-flight basically, and it's important that we pass these two headers. So in this case, we're saying, hey, just to let you know, server, I'm gonna make a GET request, so let me know if it's okay. And then the second thing is, hey, these are the headers that I'm gonna use, so let me know if that's okay. And then obviously the origin, which is very important. This is defines where it's coming from, the request. So I'm gonna go copy this and then go into my shell, paste it, and you can see that there's a problem, right? So there's actually I might zoom this one as well because it might be a bit small. Let me see what happened there. Okay, so let me do that again because let's make it clear. So okay, first thing, okay, I have a 403, so that's not good. I typically want a 200 type of a response, and then I can see that there's no specific. I mean, there's this very one header, but there's no specific headers for course. And then, final thing I can see actually invalid course request. So this one doesn't like it. So I passed this origin, fiddle.jshell.net. It didn't like it. So it didn't work, right? And that's what we expected because we have nothing there. Then I'm gonna make a straight GET request. So that would be emulating the browser, basically making the pre-flight first, and then, I mean, the browser will stop there basically, right? Because it makes the pre-flight and it gets a bad response. It's not gonna do the next request. But just for completeness, let's see the actual GET request. So pretty much same thing. We don't get the invalid. Actually, sorry, this is because I'm using the head, so I'm just looking at the headers. But basically, 403, and then same thing. I don't have the specific course headers, response headers. So that didn't work, right? Okay, fine. Now this is using HTTP. So I'm gonna do a bit of both, so HTTP and HTTPS. So in this case, I have both. I have Nginx, as I said, configured on my machine, so that's what I'm using. So to be honest, generally I recommend that rather than configuring a Tomcat directly. It's just easier, more flexible. You just stop Nginx if you don't want, and that's all, right? So it's very easy, and also reflects a bit the configuration that you typically find in a production architecture. So in this case, we'll do the same request, but using HTTPS. Now, notice also that the origin, I changed that as well. So in this case, the origin was HTTP. This one I'm putting HTTPS. Normally, that's what you want, right? You want to make sure that the two origins are, use the same scheme. There's a number of reasons for that, but it's just we'll see some of that. Anyway, same thing here, invalid course request. Anyway, you got the idea, right? So it's nothing to do with HTTP or HTTPS. It's just I don't have the right configuration. So that's, if you do this test in a container or an environment where it's more difficult to do, and this already fails, you pretty much know that there's something wrong with the server configuration, and it's nothing to do with the network or something in the middle or a firewall or a proxy. It's just, it's you tested locally from the same machine and still you don't get the right header. So, it's not configured correctly. So that's a good test. So now, excuse me. So we're gonna look at the another type of test. So we go straight into JS Fiddle. So I created this JS Fiddle. I'm gonna open an incognito window so that we guarantee that there's no caching or anything happening. And okay, so now we have this simple request, and we share this one as well. You can use it as well yourself for testing. Just gonna show this it's just a few lines of code. So we make this request, it's a get, and we go through HTTPS, and that's it. We have some comments here, can be interesting to read, but let's make this request. So I'm gonna open the browser developer tools, clean the console, and then click this button, right? So let's see what happens. So first thing, I get obviously a very obvious error here in the network console. So let's see. So we see that there you can hover in Chrome, you just hover there and say missing allow origin header. So that's your classical error. It's not set up correctly. But then we go to the console. Actually, let's go full console here. And then you get a more extended description. So request that this endpoint from origin blah 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 has been blocked by course policy. So it's not configured correctly. So that's what we see. And this is your typical situation. Okay, so that's the other test that we said. So let me go to, I'm gonna close this one actually. And now let's test visualize. So that's probably your most typical situation with JRS. Let's see what happens with visualize. So I have a different JS Fiddle for testing that. And it's super simple. This I'll show you later. It's coming from the samples. I just changed it to point to a report on my instance. And so let's see what happens. So well, first of all, I see that here I should see a report, right? And it should be loading a report, but it's not there. So something happened. So let's see. I can see already this here, but let's clear it and start again just for clarity. And yeah, it's the same thing. In this case, we actually see a pre-flight, so we see the options, and that's what I wanted to show you as well, because obviously visualize doesn't it's not a simple request as we did before with a plain JavaScript call. So therefore this triggers a pre-flight. And this is very handy because you can actually go here and click on the pre-flight, and it's going to highlight the related call. And then from this call, you can click on this link here and go back to the call that triggered the pre-flight. So you can see the two-way kind of connection between those two. The same error. I mean, it's not exactly the same because it's pre-flight, but it's still missing allow origin header. So that's the error. So it's pretty obvious that things are not working. And the console shows pretty much the same thing that we saw before. And so let me, let me now open the other one. I have a different one I want to show you something. So in this case, so what does it mean HTTPS plus HTTP? So in this case, I have, you know what, in the interest of time, I'm not going to show this here, but I'll show you after when the course works, because I think it's more relevant there. I put it there for completeness, but okay, now let's do the configuration correctly, right? So we go back here. Let's go to server attributes. So first of all, I'm going to add the source that the origin that I need. So this is very easy. I can take it directly from the error message typically. Say from origin, this is the origin, right? HTTPS, blah, blah, blah. So I'm gonna take that, copy the whole thing, and then go back to my domain whitelist and add the value here. So the first value I'm gonna add is the one without HTTP, just HTTP, and click OK, save, important. If you forget to click to save, it won't be there. But then I'm gonna add the new attribute, and I'm gonna say domain whitelist 1, and I'm gonna add the actual HTTPS. Click OK and save again. So I have my two origins that I need for this test, or in your case, it would be your own origins. And you can continue adding if you need domain whitelist 2, 3, etc. Now, this can also be done in a different way, and I'll show that briefly in the docs that we link at the end. Because you can use a regular expression. So if in this case, we could probably manage that with a regular expression and one single domain whitelist. But for simplicity and in general, use this approach unless you need something different. Okay, so that's all I've done, right? So I just saved these values, didn't restart the server, didn't do anything else. Going back to the tests, now I'm gonna go back to curl, and see what happens, right? So I'm gonna make that request with HTTP, and let's see what happens. Okay, so this is much better, right? So we see HTTP 200, so means all good. I see the course specific headers. So the response says, hey, this is the allowed origin. It's HTTP, it's what you requested. It's gonna respond only with what is requested. It's not gonna give you the whole list for security reasons. And then the allowed methods, you see there's no options here. I'll show you that in the configuration as well. And then the headers that are requested, and then some expose headers. Don't worry about that for now. And then allow credentials true, important. We'll talk about it briefly. And then the max age for the pre-flight cache that I told you before, 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. So all good. I'm happy. I'm gonna now go to my actual request. Let's go straight to let's say HTTPS, just as a test. I want to show you something. So to see that both work. And now pretty much the same thing. I see the headers, the response headers, blah, blah, blah. HTTP 200. You can also see server nginx, which wasn't there before, because this response coming from the proxy. And then I see just the beginning. I did a head here just to see the beginning, but basically the beginning of the file. So this is the file I requested, index.htm. It's just a simple file that's there for redirect, and just the beginning of the file. So you know that the file has been returned and it's working fine. So okay, that's all good. So I want to go a bit quicker because I don't want to use too much of the time. Okay, this, by the way, is just my log of the Jasper server, and just tailing the log. Anyway, so let's leave it there. So in case we need to check something. Okay, now let's go back to the fiddle test. We have a few here. I'm gonna start with the simple one. So let's see what we have. So I'm gonna close this incognito window, open a brand new one, and we'll do the same test that we've done before, but now the configuration should work. Okay, so console, I'm gonna clean, this is not important. And now it's all clean. And I'll make the course request. Okay, 200, all good. That's what I expected. But this is a better test than curl because it's from a browser, so it's a bit more complete. The request, as you saw, it's quite straightforward. It's a get on the same file, and I have no custom header, so this didn't generate any pre-flight. So now the next one we're going to see is going to be, let's see. Actually, it's going to be post request. So let's have a look at that quickly. Let's see what happens with post. instead of get. So it's exactly the same request, but I pass in a post method, same endpoint. Now, this endpoint doesn't really care about my posted data, right? But this doesn't matter. This is for the purpose of the test, it doesn't matter for this particular test. Okay, let's see what happens. Console, same thing, clear, make course. Okay, that's fine. So it's not a 200, but it's not a 400 or 500. That's what you want. It's a 300. So it's a redirect, and that's fine because basically it's telling me, hey, you know what? This file, this post to this file is not, you know, I have nothing to do with it. So I'm just going to redirect you, and you can see that it's going to redirect me here. So location, login page. So it's just going to send me to the login page. So that's fine. Server Nginx, same thing, and it's all good. Let's see. What else? Okay, the course headers that we talked about, they're here. And after that, it makes a get because of the redirect, and that works fine. Same thing with the headers, all good. Okay, so post also works. Now, to make it work with actual things that, you know, REST endpoints that receive posts, they're allowed to get posted data. Then there's a potentially CSRF problem if it's not configured correctly, but that's topic for another time. But just to let you know, with post, delete, and put, you're gonna need also CSRF if it's enabled, which is by default. Now let's try the same thing with custom header, right? So again, incognito window, same post request, but this time I'm setting a header. And this header I've chosen is not a random one, right? So it's a custom header, but it's a custom header that's actually required for CSRF, and that's what I was mentioning before. Now, in most cases, you're probably going to have your own custom headers, and you know, if you're using a framework like, you know, Angular or, you know, whatever you're using, typically you're going to have some custom headers, and therefore we should see a pre-flight request here. So let's see, same thing, console, click make course request, nothing in the console, which is good. And this one worked fine. Again, made the post, sorry, the options one first, the pre-flight, and 200. And the reason I got a pre-flight is because of the custom header. So this is just to explain this. There's more details here about the CSRF and what to check. But basically, if you want to use make post, typically you're gonna have to set this to make REST calls directly from JavaScript. Typically, you're gonna have to set this custom header. In the documentation, we say 1. I think any value will be fine actually, but just set it to 1, and that will help. Will allow you to make the request and pass the CSRF check. So this is just an additional thing, but just wanted to let you know. Now, final test, because we want to leave some time for questions, is the HTTP. So instead of HTTPS, we go through HTTP. So open incognito window again. Let's see what happens here. So a couple of things here, right? So first of all, notice that I'm not using HTTPS here in JS Fiddle as well. So in this case, I am, right? But in the previous cases, this one I'm not using. It's important that use the same scheme for both. And now, of course, the GET request also goes to HTTP port 8080, which is the default for Jasper when you do a bundle install. And then same thing, we go to console, clear that, and start the request. Okay, this one worked, all good. But let's look at the console. So it worked, but there's a warning message from Chrome, right? Chrome says, hey, you know what? You shouldn't be doing this, right? So that's basically what it's saying. It's saying, I think from July 2021, this is not going to work anymore. So I just wanted to show you this because we go back to the HTTPS requirement, and we'll see that now in Visualize. And this is the last thing I want to show you. So let me close all of this, and we start new. Now let's look at the Visualize test. We start simple. Calling the window. I know it's a bit of repetition here, but okay. I see the report. So obviously things already worked. This uses a very basic authentication method, but that's fine. And it worked. But let's have a look at okay, this is not relevant. And then let's run it again to see what happens. I got the pre-flights, blah, 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 more than one coming from Visualize. And no errors, all good, all 200, nothing in the console, all great. Okay, so now let's go to a bit of more advanced one that we mentioned before. This is going to be the last two tests. So I'm going to say incognito window. So this one, as I said before, HTTPS plus HTTP. So it means JS Fiddle, we go through HTTPS, but not for Jasper. And this didn't work, right? I got a sign-in box. This probably won't even work, even if I sign in. And I see an error here. And I go to, and obviously I don't see the report. And sorry, and then actually let's just run it again, see what happens. Okay, it's pending there, still no error, but then when I cancel, it gives me this 401, right? So, and then the console, I see this authentication error. So this is not super clear. It doesn't tell you, oh, but basically know that the reason is we're loading HTTP 8080 from an origin that not HTTP. Okay, so last one. Let's put them both in HTTP, right? Let's see if that works. Open incognito window. Unfortunately, same problem, same exact problem. Although we're using HTTP in both cases, here and here, still the same error. And I won't go into the details of this, but basically, just know that it's related to a relatively recent change. Well, Chrome was Chrome 80, so probably last year at some point, but pretty much same error here. Okay, network we didn't see, but anyway, just know that basically with Visualize, just know that we have to use HTTPS. That's the, and to be honest, it's not that difficult. Install a proxy, but or do it in Tomcat directly. We go through this in the links here. So HTTPS requirements for Visualize.js with latest browser versions. Just gonna click on that briefly. Just go through this, but basically, if you use HTTPS, as you saw in the first sample or test I done, everything works fine. There's a lengthy explanation here, but when you have 7.5 with hotfixes, 7.2 even, and older versions, 7.9 already has the fix, so you don't need that, but you still need the HTTPS requirement. So just for you to know. And then I think we're pretty much done. We have a few more links here, but I think let's leave some time for questions. We went a bit over time, but there was a lot of tests. I'm gonna mention quickly about CSRF. There's a link there as well. And then about the, this is just for if you want to test Visualize in incognito window, you need to allow all cookies. We have a link there as well. It's important, otherwise it's not going to work. And that's pretty much it. I think we're open for questions. So Badr.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you so much for this great presentation and very rich demo. That was great. We do have a question from Stas Polivanenko. So he said, hi Kamal, nice presentation, good tips too, I agree. It seems that course issues have become more frequent with JS users recently. So are you seeing any similar trend? Did you do any analysis on what are the reasons?
Right. That's a very good question. And Stas, thanks for asking this. So yeah, I mean, we've seen a few situations and we're still figuring out, to be honest. In some cases, as I mentioned in the known issues, I don't have, clear proof, 100% proof yet, because we're still working on it, but definitely network configuration, it's one, and the curl test should help in some cases with that. So make sure that the curl test works before looking into the network. And the other thing is the configuration, especially when we're talking about upgrades, and we see a lot of upgrades obviously recently. So from 7.5 to later. So unfortunately, that's something that we have to check with people, because of course if you go with the vanilla installation, pretty much everything works, right? So but when we do these upgrades, sometimes things go wrong. So we have to make sure that we do a test where things are clean vanilla and then start adding changes. And I know that's not something that support always can do. Please let us know, and we'll try to help, obviously, in the customer success team.
Thank you. We have a remark from Reagan, said this presentation clarified a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan.
That was on the chat. So I do have actually a little question. So Kamal, if you just put the focus on the calls that are blocked by CORS. So just what I understood is, if we are prior to 7.8, we need to update the configuration file, the web.xml, with the link that you shared in presentation. But in 7.8 and forward, it's gotten a lot easier. So all we need to do is to add the domain whitelist in the server settings, right?
Correct.
That's
so yeah. So that's all we need to do. As I showed you, as I showed in the demo, that's what I did. I didn't restart anything, just added those. And I just want to show something, because I forgot in relation to this question. Let me start again. So if I go, something I didn't show, but basically this is the configuration for 7.9. I have this course filter bean. That's the file security pro web XML. And this is pretty much out of the box. I didn't change anything here. There's no options here in the allowed methods. And this is already there. So you don't have to do anything typically, unless you have special requirements. The other thing is web XML for 7.9. I'm going to do a search for course filter. There's nothing, right? There shouldn't be anything here. Otherwise, it's going to conflict. And what else? In 7.5.1 and earlier, instead, by default, you're going to find this course filter, which, again, if you just use visualize, this is the important bit. If you just use visualize, you don't use kind of pure JavaScript for making REST calls and stuff like that, the domain whitelist will work, because in 7.5 and 7.5.1 and earlier, we use a different approach. And this is documented in the wiki. You can look into that. But so the domain whitelist will work for visualize, but not for those other tests that we've done in JS Fiddle. So if you need that, so if you're not using visualize and you still need to make those calls in JavaScript from a different origin, obviously you need this configuration. So, and as I said before, I took the values pretty much from, apart from the origins that I set, of course, here manually, I took this is my 7.5 installed that I didn't show, but for testing. And all the other values I took from the 7.9 and I pasted them here, but they need to be reorganized because it's not the same structure. So, but this is all in the article. So you can just take it from there and change it to your requirements. So unfortunately, it's a bit more complex, but that's how you should do it. And
yeah, but that was super clear, Kamal. Thank you so much.
No problem.
That's great. So guys, I don't see any questions for the moment. Okay, well, here is one from Eric. This is a non-course question. Okay, I might have misunderstood, but did you say the REST calls from the browser were not a valid use case? Can you explain again? The reason I'm asking is because we were planning on using Visualize.js to run reports from our application.
Okay. Well, okay. It's not that it's not a valid. I mean, it's if you have a different option. So if you have your own Java application, your own Python application, and you want to, let's say you want to retrieve a list of reports, right, from Jasper Server, very common use case, and show them to the user, right, on the screen. So you have two options. One is you make the request directly from your Python code. So server to server, you make the REST call, and then you show the data, to the client, or you do it in JavaScript, and then you have to make the XML HTTP request or fetch request. But in that case, you're going to need a course. So all I'm saying is that if you have the simpler option of not going through course, not having to worry about that, do it directly from your code. It's basically from the backend code instead of the front end code. That's kind of the difference. So you bypass course completely. There's no course there, because again, just to repeat it, take home concept is course is only really applicable to browsers. It doesn't really matter for any other kind of client typically. So unless that client does it on purpose, but typically it's only browsers. That's all. It's not that it's not recommended, but if you can go the easier option, and to be honest, in my opinion, might depend on the architecture and everything, but often it's faster, especially if you're retrieving a lot of data through REST, and maybe you don't want to show all the data to the user. If you let the client do it, there's a lot of network, a lot of data moving on the network, etc. Whereas if you do it server to server, typically they sit even in the same data center or even the same machine sometimes. So the retrieval of the data is instant or is much faster, and then you show to the user only what you want. So that's, in terms of performance and security, things are a bit easier that way. But there's pros and cons in both. And sorry for the longer reply.
Okay, thanks. There's another question from Stas. I believe you mentioned in one of the initial slides that we could use better tools to troubleshoot the course issues. Do you know if there are any specific ideas, requests that have been already communicated to Jaspersoft engineering?
Good point. So we talked about it, but I don't think there's an official request yet. So this is something that we should do, to have a better code instrumentation, exactly for the situations where in theory everything should work, but it doesn't, and we need to just have more information in the logs. So yeah, right. I'm happy to talk to you, Stas, later about that. Thanks for the question.
All right. I think we're close to the top of the hour here.
Just that question before for Keith, was that relevant to course, or was it something else?
Yeah, now it was for the Jasper query language. I was asking, will SQL continue to be available and supported by Jasper Server? The answer is yes. SQL will still be available as a language to use for studio-based reports.
Got it.
Jasper query language is just another option to use from your to bring data from your domain, rather than
it's a more advanced option that we now have. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I think we're good. Well, Eric answered you. They say that makes sense. Thanks to the questions about the use case, the REST calls use case.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric.
Okay, so guys, if you still have any questions, please don't forget to, if you're on an Upshift program, please reach out to your CSM, Customer Success Manager. It will coordinate with all of our teams, the Customer Success Architect teams, to schedule and schedule time to help you guys. If you're not on any Upshift program, please shoot an email to drjaspersoft@tipco.com. I guess do we have the email in the resources, Kamal? Yeah, in the thank you, in the last slide. This is, we monitor this email and we can answer your questions on that email. Don't also forget that we upload all our session in YouTube. So if you go to Jaspersoft Embedded BI in channel in YouTube, and you're gonna have this session will be uploaded, I think, probably in the next 2 or 3 days. We also have the slides with all the Kamal's tests that showed you now, which will be on Jaspersoft community page there, wiki Dr. Jaspersoft. And don't forget to register for our next session, the Jasper query language. The landing page will be soon updated in probably today, later on the day, or tomorrow. And then you can, don't forget to go ahead and register for our June 10th session. So for that, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you guys for joining. Hope that was helpful for you. And
hey, but just a quick mention on the community website as well. You can post the question and just tag it with Dr. Jasper, as we show here, and we'll try to monitor that every now and then, so we can answer there. Probably better option than sending the email, but if you obviously send an email, that's also great. So just want to mention that. Thanks.
Thank you. So have a good evening and good morning to you all, and see you in the next Dr. Jaspersoft session. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.